Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about a September rate cut and how low mortgage rates might go this fall. Logan, welcome back to the podcast on Fed Day.
On Fed Day. And I have to tell you guys this. One of the things I love to do, as you well know, Sarah, is debating and reading people. Like, that's just how I operate. I know when a man is full of, just by the way he talks and certain words he says. And today, Jay Powell's presser, he looked so skittish.
Okay, so what does that mean?
I mean, he wasn't sure of himself or how to answer, and there was no clear-cut line he could say that he felt comfortable. I saw that as actually a bullish thing, that they're at the point right now to where it just seems like through some of the answers that there were talks about cutting today. And obviously they didn't do that, which we talked about last podcast, that they weren't going to cut. They would market signal, but we could clearly see that the labor data runs the show. They kind of don't want the labor data to get worse. The growth rate of inflation has fallen. It's been here for some time. The month-to-month prints are really what they're looking at. We're going to have some base effects on the year-over-year inflation data going out. But really, it is the labor market runs the show. And they're kind of like, yeah. So going out, September cut looks in, the 2-year yield has fallen noticeably. The 10-year yield last time I checked was 4.10. So I know some people were disappointed with Powell and the Fed today, but if you kind of read them over the last 2-3 years, the labor data is really the key to everything. And now that they're talking about dual mandates and that, we don't want to see the labor market soften anymore. It's a Mickey Mouse reason that they didn't cut today, but it's the Mickey Mouse Fed. So this is what we're dealing with. So they're going to wait until September. Again, we're at the stage of the cycle now to where we really focus on the internals, jobless claims data, wage growth, these things, and we go out in the future with it, depending on, how much does yields need to fall, how many rate cuts do we need to get, but we're kind of at that stage now, and how unsure he was today really spoke volumes to me.
So I think it's interesting. So we had Dudley, right, former New York Federal Reserve president, saying, and you remarked about that, how it's like, why wait? Why wait now? So I think that even though the Fed itself was, like you said on our last podcast, you didn't expect it to happen today. There's a lot more people saying, like, there's not really a good reason to wait.
I'm sympathetic to that view, but that's kind of not what the Fed has been doing. If jobless claims today were at 297,000, they would have cut, because they've told us, we follow jobless claims. It's been going lower. Well, now today they said, well, jobless claims have been going higher recently, but still historically low. All true. But the fact that he talked about jobless claims being historically low is what I've always said, is that, do you want to wait until the labor market breaks, then go, oh my God, who could have seen it coming? Or do you want to be the kind of Fed that gets ahead of the curve, right? It's like what I always ask people, when I always try to debate people, will you actually forecast with your name and face? No. Does the Fed want to get ahead of the curve on it? This Fed doesn't want to. This Fed wants to wait to see the labor data get a little bit worse. And he said that today. I don't think a lot of people picked up on that, but they said all these data lines are still historically low. We believe the unemployment rate is historically low, but we're also concerned that we don't want to see the labor market get softer. So wishy-washy, Mickey Mouse kind of, but to me, that just shows to me that they're now mindful of the dual mandate. And that's what we always wanted. We wanted the Fed to start talking about a dual mandate Fed, not a single mandate Fed. And we kind of take it from there. And again, we've always highlight the job openings data a little bit higher than estimates today, but the hires pre-COVID, the quit percentage, all these things, the internals of the job openings data has been softening for months now. That was always the case. I think they just want to see more weakness. So when they feel like they can cut, they're going to fall back on that. Well, the labor market is soft. We have to be a dual mandate Fed, and that to me makes sense for how they've acted after 2022. Remember the Fed? Somebody spiked the Fed's eggnog.
Right.
This is in direct, constant theme about the Fed, whoever spiked the Fed's eggnog in the late part of 2022. And we just take it from there, and we follow all the economic data for a reason. And I think that's going to be very key just for the housing market going out in the future.
He mentioned again, the confidence, that word confidence that has kind of plagued us all year, where he's like, we're not confident, we're not confident. At the same time, one of the stats that I saw from BLS was the percentage of unemployed workers who've gone without roles for 27 weeks or more has recently surged, right? With about 1.5 million people, total workers now in that category. So it feels like, to your point, if it depends on what they want to cherry pick. If they pick that, there are things that they could claim gave them confidence, but they've decided to look at one very narrow measure, I think.
It's like we've talked about for a very long time. The Fed is waiting for the labor market to break. They have all the data in the world based on their own Fed funds rate. They chose to be very restrictive still. And even if they cut 3 times this year, they would still be restrictive on their policy. That's what this is their own model. I'm not using what anybody, but that's their choice. So that's kind of how I look at it. Like, everyone has a different variation of what a Fed pivot looks like. The Fed pivot to me is you go ahead and say, listen, we want to move to an accommodative stance. Oh my God, that is such a simple thing for them. Sarah, can you imagine the layup that they were given? And they could have just said, listen, the growth rate of inflation has fallen a lot, and we want to take our restrictive policy and make it head toward an or neutral stance. We're not even talking about an accommodative, just neutral stance. Because if you think inflation is going to be 2.5% to 3%, you can cut 3, 4, 5 times and still be somewhat restrictive in your own model. They chose not to do that. So the confidence was never about inflation at this stage. The confidence is that the labor market is not breaking. It's getting weaker, guys. It's getting weaker. We know, but it's still historically low data. So they have absolutely performed in a masterpiece since 2022. They have stuck to that. We are going to stay as restrictive as policy, as tight as we possibly can until the last second. And then when the labor market breaks, we're going to go, oh my God, we didn't know. 6 decades of this same dance that we've always done. So it's actually in line. It's just, I could see the frustration by so many people today. Oh my God, everybody said, what are you, at least you could have made it even a more dovish, but this is who they are. We only couldn't play the guy ahead of us. We can't make the choices for them. So they just kind of stuck to their game plan here. So it does look like September is going to be the first rate cut. The 10-year yield has fallen a lot recently. And we'll just take it from there. But again, we've always stressed this. The labor data is key. The construction and manufacturing workers are key. Those labor data lines are deteriorating in some of the job openings data. We're starting to get to pre-COVID levels on some of those things. So we just take it from there. And they could have done it, but it would have been out of their character, the Fed's character in the last 2 years to have cut today.
So I was just at the CoreLogic Connect conference, great conference. They had an economic panel, as you know. You saw that, and I interviewed Selma Hepp afterwards, their chief economist. They also had Bob Brooksmith and some other people on there. Mike Fratantoni was there. And so the NBA is, their forecast is for 2 rate cuts, one in September and one in December. And they think that whatever happens will be about 6.5% on the mortgage rates by the end of the year. So I guess I wanted to ask you, do you have a forecast for how many rate cuts we might see and where we might end the year up?
The only way you would get more than 2 rate cuts is if jobless claims just absolutely starts to shoot up. And if it starts to shoot up, you're going to have to do more discussions of maybe a 50 basis point cut. So they talked about that today, that's not something. But again, if the labor data gets really weaker on them now, if anybody saw the presser, look at Powell's body language and the way he talked. This was a man who was skittish, right? This is like all the housing crash people when I say, do you write a forecast? What? You want me to write my name down in a forecast? No. It's like, no, skittish, right? Skittish people, in my experience, if something needed to happen for them to turn, they turn like this. So jobless claims, we're going to track jobless claims data. So go with 2. I always take the under on what the market pricing is, and then we take it from there. But again, we are so at the point to where jobless claims run the shows on them that they even said it today, that all these data lines are really low historically. The Fed believes that a long time ago, that 5% unemployment rate is really the natural low unemployment rate. So them getting up to here is like, okay, we can handle this. But getting to 4.5%, even with the labor force growing and with we're continuing claims and everything, it starts to put them in a box. Powell looked like he was in a box. He really looked uncomfortable. Like he knows what's going on out there. Everybody is telling him, why aren't you cutting? And there's really like no reason for them not to cut. But this is just the Fed is, because Sarah Wheeler, they need confidence. They need confidence that when they start cutting rates, and let's say they had one bad inflation report and they're going, oh my God, so it's just nature of the beast, guys. It's just nature of the beast.
So that answers how many you think we'll get to. I guess my question is like, so in September, for instance, do you feel like the market's already, factored that into where we are?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So that's not going to drop anything when they cut rates in September?
So let's look at it this way. When the 10-year yield got all the way down to 3.24, the Fed wasn't cutting rates. They were still hiking rates. We had lower mortgage rates while the Fed was raising rates still, and with a growth rate of inflation higher. How did that happen? How is that even possible? Because the market was anticipating the US going into recession, and it just wasn't there. That's the whole Gandalf line. For those of you who remember, we created the Gandalf line, like, we shouldn't break under this level. I don't see the labor data breaking yet. And you can get lower rates if the economic data gets, oh, Sarah, the marketplace is so geared up. If they really see labor market deteriorating, they are not going to wait for the Fed. And this is what the old Fed president Bullard talked about many months ago before he left the Fed. He said, we believe that if worse comes to worse, the long end of the market will go lower and it will do a lot of the heavy lifting for us before we start. Should we cut a quarter? Maybe, could you imagine how they're going to be in the rate cut cycle? Unless jobless claims break, they're going to be like, oh, what should we do? So again, the economic data matters more for everyone that's listening in the mortgage and real estate industry. I think the one thing about the Fed cutting rates now, or we're pricing, is how much better can the spreads get? Because if the spreads get better, Sarah, we can be 6.5% today, just a little bit more improvement on the spreads. We can be under 6% today if the spreads get to normal. So we are now in the point to where we're going to get rate cuts. How much does the spreads get better? And with a 10-year yield fall, how low can rates go? So this is why I don't like doing like a forecast for a quarter or anything. I like to take the weekly data and see what's going on, because clearly the spreads are getting better this year, right? And that's a huge, when we wrote the tracker last week, we're talking about a 60 basis points different in mortgage rates right now, taking the worst levels of the spreads last year. And now it's just better. So you can get 6.5 like this, just by one lower move in the 10-year yield and better spread. So we'll have to track this weekly. And again, the tracker article kind of shows you guys how the spreads are on a year-over-year basis. And if we're anywhere back to normal, we are sub 6% today with a 10-year yield at 4.10. So that's why we have to track the weeklies with a little bit more of a critical eye, because the spreads can be a bigger story going out for the second half of 2024 and also in 2025.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the reasons that you started putting the spreads as part of the tracker, we didn't do that until what, a couple months ago. And now you put that in there and there's always a chart there, just like you've added pendings. You've added some things to that. There's like 8 data points that you're tracking every week that show you where things are headed.
When we go back to the history of spreads, back to 1970, there's been periods of times where the spreads get really bad and then they always get better. They've always gotten better, right? So we kind of have to assume that unless something changes, like last year, the spreads were getting better. Then the Silicon Valley banking crisis happened and the Fed wasn't cutting rates. The Fed kept on raising rates with the Silicon Valley banking crisis. So it made everything more restrictive. It's not the case now. So the spreads were acting a little bit better than I thought. I thought right about now is when the spreads would get noticeably better. They've been getting noticeably better for a few months now. So it's something to think about in the future. The 10-year yield always runs the show, but the spreads are basically a big factor in terms of how much faster we can get rates lower. But again, it all still revolves around labor data. They had a choice. They could have easily just said it today. They could have said, listen, we are very restrictive policy. This is what our policy stance is, and we are going to cut rates. And then we just want to kind of move slowly toward or neutral. We're not doing any accommodative stance, and we just want to make sure that we can keep rates higher for longer and not have to force. They could have done that. They chose not to. They chose not to for a reason. Even though we all see the labor data getting softer, we all see this. They even acknowledge it. They choose not to. So we're at a different stage, 1 week at a time. But again, volatility can happen. Things can happen in the marketplace that can push yields down or even up. But we have to take the labor data as the key indicator. As they've said today, they don't want the labor data to get any softer. History is not on their side, but we'll see how this goes. We had the job openings, ADP report, nothing too dramatic. Jobless claims will come out by the time this podcast comes out, and then we have Jobs Friday, and we work it from there.
I feel like 2025 is shaping up to be what we all thought 2024 was going to be, right? Like at the end, let's see, November, December, we were pretty optimistic that we'd see rates fall down and that just things would be getting better in 2024. And they're better than 2023, but it feels like 2025 is going to be the year for housing that we get out of the recession. What are your thoughts?
Someone doesn't believe rates can fall more noticeably until the labor market breaks. So,
but you know that's going to happen between here and 25.
Well, here's the thing. It's what 2024 didn't have is that the Fed wasn't in its kind of cutting stage yet. It's only now, because why are we talking about this? Why are we even talking about this with the unemployment rate at this and stocks at all-time highs and home prices at all? It's because the labor data is deteriorating, especially the last few months. If that continues, if the Fed really wants to try to get, I mean, realistically, let's be honest, Sarah, they hiked rates 5% very fast. It didn't crash the economy. And 2 or 3 rate cuts, if the labor market is breaking, isn't going to really do anything. However, disproportionately speaking, housing will benefit in that. Just because yields can go lower and there'll be more pressure on them. Because what is the one sector that is at the 3rd calendar year of the lowest home sales ever? Is housing. What's the one sector that has permits falling for single family? Housing. What's the one section that has permits at recession level? Housing. So the sector that has been hit the hardest during an expansion would benefit if rates fall down lower. So we'll take it as is, but we have a different labor market than, let's say, 2008, where we had very high unemployment rates. Job openings were very low back then. The demographic switch wasn't there. So the labor dynamics are structurally a little bit different than back then. So it really is the question about the Fed can pull levers and triggers if they wanted to make a lot of things better. The question is, do they have it in them? I don't see anything in them yet. But when jobless claims break, I think everything just churns because their credibility is so on the line now. And there's so many people giving them grief at this moment that boy, if the labor market breaks, their whole language is going to change. They could slow down QT. They can do a lot of things to help the economy more than what people think. The question is, will they? Right? Will they take it to that next stage? And that's something we're going to have to see each meeting and the verbiage. But as of right now, jobless claims getting up toward 323,000, but not there yet. The 4-week moving average isn't even above 250 yet. So small steps for them, but we just have to take it weekly and see how it impacts the data line.
So on your tracker this for last week, you emphasized new listings. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think people were pretty confused, or at least some people were confused about what the new listings data, how that's different than the active inventory, how that plays into it. Let's talk about new listings just a little bit.
So here's something for everyone. This is going to be a good historical lesson for everyone right now. We have 80 years of home price data, 80. And there was only one period in time in history where nominal home prices crashed, noticeable declines. That was the period in times where new listings data took off, inventory took off, monthly supply stayed elevated. So the new listings are the homes that come onto the market that don't get a contract. Right now, they're historic low. Even today, as we are talking right now, third calendar year of the lowest home sales ever, active inventory is nowhere close to the 5-decade average. It's because we don't have a lot of sellers. The one period in time where we had a lot of sellers, distressed sellers, credit sellers, that data line 250 to 400,000 per week. Sarah, per week for years.
It's
We were
so
talking
crazy.
years. We didn't even get to 80,000. So what's going to happen right now is a seasonal decline of new listings is going to happen. And then whatever homes are on the market right now, the supply and demand equilibrium works. What's happened is we have so many people in America who have never forecasted housing, have no working models whatsoever, have no idea what's going on, right? And they see the active inventory. Everybody says inventory is up 40%. Home prices are crashing. So home prices are at all-time highs. What happened? Inventory is up 130% plus. You have to take the supply and demand equilibrium. And when we see stress, because we have 80 years, think about it, we have 80 years of data. And we saw this happen one time. Remember, a functioning, educated man who can read and write can see this. He can show his children this. This is what happened, because 80 years is a long time. There was a period where monthly supply stayed elevated for a very long time. And that was because new listings data was elevated, because these were sellers that weren't buyers. They were just straight inventory, right? And that's how you got prices declining in 2007 to 11. That's how you got monthly supply averaging above 8 months during that period of time as well. This is why home prices Sarah, guess what? Home prices hit another all-time high. Are you shocked?
I'm not shocked, but I understand why other people are shocked.
You always know rookie ball when they use the percentages without taking in context to the historical data. But in this case, we don't see stress sellers in scale. There's nothing in there. So what's going to happen is the seasonal declines of new listings, and then inventory will have a seasonal decline, and we start all over again. Right. I'd argue after March of this year, we started to see the inventory grow. I think the debate really is between the mortgage rate lockdown people and the non-mortgage rate lockdown people. And can inventory grow with higher mortgage rates? And there's a group of people that believe that inventory can't grow because nobody wants to sell their houses. That's not true. People
this is a subtweet of me, as we all know. We know.
Oh, Sarah, no, I don't. I wouldn't get you involved in something like this. So higher rates, inventory can grow, right? Because of, at least this is my model. It's a little bit different than what Mike Simonson talks about. But again, 70% of sellers, 70 to 80% of sellers are buyers. There's 20 to 30% inventory left over. First-time home buyers don't give you a house. So as mortgage demand grows, the active inventory, this has been happening for 14 years. And reading is a good thing, and you don't even have to read. You can just look at the chart. And the one period in time in history that we saw elevated monthly supply and elevated new listings was the period in time for 80 years, going back to 1942, where nominal home prices fell. 2007, 8, 9, 10, and 11. 2012, the new listings data started to come down. Monthly supply started to come down. That's when home prices started to rise. So we have data, and this is why I always say that our tracker, we have active inventory, new listings data, pending home sales, price cut percentages. We take the 10-year yield, the mortgage backed, the spreads between 30-year and 10-year. We talk about the purchase application data, which is the next surprising topic. We put it all together, and it's this beautiful, sexy equilibrium of housing data that cannot be broken because it is live, fresh data. And it's really worked since the Peloponnesian War. But you have to have the ability to know the difference between active and new listings and price cut percentages. And just from what I've seen out there, we have very few men in America who have to forecast housing. They just don't have it in them, Sarah. I mean, you want to see a bunch of guys who just run around there and thinking they're God's gift to economic data. So what we do is we challenge all of them. And so far, yet today, we had another one. We have zero forecasting from anyone. No models, no nothing. And I will be here until I am dead. We'll get every single one of them to all of a sudden man up, and they're going to have to forecast, and they won't do it. And I think the new listings data is something fairly new to a lot of people, but we do have history on it, on why the monthly supply was elevated, because the housing market technically broke in 2005, right? So this is it's so interesting. This is such a historical period where we have the two most opposite cycles in the history of mankind. And anybody with a second grade education and visually could actually see it. But we have so many people who just keep on saying 30, 40, 50, 60% home price crashes. Everyone is poor. There's no money. It's just,
I know.
Sarah,
I know. You're on a mission.
It's just one group of men in this country. Oh, and I am telling you, I am going to live a very long life because I'm healthy. And it's going to be beauty watching these people live and then pass off in the afterlife here, buried in America, because they didn't have the guts to leave. Always crying about, oh my God, Americans are poor, inflation is killing us, everything. We're the strongest economy in the world. If you don't like it, you can go. You can go. Canada, Mexico, Argentina. They're getting rid of the Fed, Sarah. They're getting rid of the Fed. But what you can't do is cry every day, because your kids are going to see you and they're going to go, Daddy cries all the time, so I'm going to cry every time about the Fed. So no, it is a war. This is a war. These are the bearish Americans we've talked about for over 100 years. We are not going to give up on this. We will fight this group until we are dead, dead, dead. And I love it.
We know it gets you fired up for sure. Logan, thanks for being on, especially on Fed Day. Very exciting.
One last thing. The pending home sales data surprised a lot of people today because it was positive. Okay, again, it was working from the lowest levels ever recorded in history. Literally, I'm not even kidding you. It was literally the lowest ever recorded. The month of June, we had 3 weeks of positive purchase application data in a row. That can filter 30, 60, 90 days into any sales data. It can filter into a pending home sales, not an existing, but it can filter into the pending home sales data. So hopefully that explains the beat in pending home sales. But context is critical. We're working from the lowest levels ever. It doesn't take much. To move the needle. So that 3 weeks that we've highlighted in the tracker articles, like a lot of people say the lower rates didn't, it actually did. It just filtered into this pending. So you don't want to read anything into that. This is what happens when you work from very low levels. If you really need like 12 to 14 weeks of positive trending data for it to be material. We haven't had that happen this year. We had that happen late 2022 and early 2023, but not the case this time. So purchase application data is very seasonal. The second week of January to the first week of May. And then after May, total volumes traditionally fall. We've had some very weird things happen post-COVID with this data line and a lot of data lines. But again, this is why we have the tracker. And for those of you that read the tracker, you know I literally count every single week so people could get some kind of perspective of what's going on. And especially, we'll see what happens, because the only time I saw noticeable demand pick up in apps is when rates were heading down toward 6%. But again, it's a non-seasonal period time of the year, so we have to put that into context.
It's going to be so interesting to see what happens this fall if we get significantly lower rates. what will happen as far as inventory and sales and purchase apps. So we'll be watching. Thanks so much, Logan.
Thank you so much, Sarah Wheeler.